I do want to talk about what happened in Westminster yesterday. Because we know now, don't we, from the Supreme Court that Boris Johnson broke the law, and Parliament returned yesterday for hour after hour of, well, let's be honest, utterly pointless chat. Except it wasn't a debate of any sort at all, even though that was what we were told MPs would be doing. It was just finger-pointing, point scoring and a blame game all day. Hysterical, angry MPs accusing each other on all sides of everything under the sun. And now opposition MPs are blaming the Prime Minister for the lack of civility and decency in our political discourse. And they even went so far as to blame him for the death threats that they get because of the language that he uses. Let's get this straight. Remainers have, over the last 3.5 years, called Leavers racists, xenophobes, fascists, far-right, ignorant, uneducated, stupid, and some have even celebrated that elderly Leave voters have died off. And yet Boris Johnson called the Ben Act to delay Brexit once again the Surrender Act, and they clutch their pearls in horror. Labour MPs who last night accused the Prime Minister of insulting the memory of murdered MP Jo Cox are the same MPs who cheer on a party leader in Jeremy Corbyn, whose friends include the IRA, Hamas and anti-Semites. And they cheer on a shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, who laughs openly on stage about lynching a female Tory MP and calls her a word we normally reserve for female dogs. The Liberal Democrat MPs calling for less extreme language are the very same MPs who campaigned at the last European elections in May with an official party slogan, B-word, because I can't even say it on air, to Brexit. The MPs shouting, "You should be in jail" at the Prime Minister yesterday are the same ones who, at hearing the word humbug, pass the smelling salts. Boris Johnson didn't invoke Jo Cox. He didn't use her name. He didn't mention her. When he said humbug, he wasn't dismissing the murder of an innocent MP in the European election campaign. He was rightly dismissing the outrageous claims of Labour MP Paula Sherriff, who tried to invoke Jo Cox's murder for political point scoring. This is how low some people in this debate will go. They'll laugh at a rapper who holds up an effigy of Boris Johnson's severed head at an awards ceremony. They'll laugh when Nigel Farage gets milkshaked or angry mobs shout outside Jacob Rees-Mogg's house when his children are there. No MP should ever get death rates. No one should get death rates. Nothing ever justifies a death threat or a threat of violence to anyone in any circumstances. But if the MPs who claim they really want more civility in our politics really do want more civility in our politics, rather than just to try and score political points against a Prime Minister and a policy that they hate, may I respectfully and politely suggest to them that they should start showing the basic civility to the electorate of respecting their democratic vote to leave. Until then, I've got just one word in response to all of your hysterical hand-wringing and your finger-pointing. Humbug. Let's talk to another member of Parliament from yet another party, the SNP's David Linden. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. We've been talking all morning about these ugly scenes in Westminster yesterday, the accusations, the finger-pointing that went on. I'm sure you'd like to make a few points about that, but I also would like to move on about where we go now and how early we can get an election. But first, your thoughts on the finger-pointing and the accusations going to and forth from the opposition and the Tory benches in terms of language and traitor and surrenders and humbugs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the scenes last night were pretty unedifying and probably don't demonstrate that the House of Commons is a particularly kind of helpful place. I actually happen to think that the British Parliament's pretty broken as it is and doesn't really work for Scotland. But in the wider point about Brexit, I mean, it's quite clear that this Prime Minister is trying to stoke up tensions in a way that is deeply unhelpful. And I know that there are a number of MPs on both sides of the House, frankly, who think that we're probably heading for another kind of event where an MP is assaulted. And I think we just need to kind of take the temperature down a little bit, deal with this calmly. But I mean, some of the Prime Minister's behaviour last night was not befitting of a man who holds office as UK Prime Minister.
OK. Again, you could say the Prime Minister stoking up tensions. Do you not think that Liberal Democrats announcing they're just going to, without even a second referendum, just revoke Article 50 and voting by the SNP, by Labour, Green Party and Liberal Democrats and others to effectively tie the Prime Minister's hands and what he's called the surrender bill to force him to seek an extension to Article 50 is also stoking up tensions, particularly with those 17.4 million people who did vote to leave? Do you see that would stoke up tensions?
No, not really.
Okay.
I think the kind of issue when you've got something that you call a surrender bill, I mean, there is no such thing as a surrender bill or a surrender act in Parliament. And using language like surrender, I mean, that just evokes the imagery of war, of battle. And frankly, if we're being quite frank, I know that you're relatively frank yourself, when we talk about surrender, you think of something like Jo Cox, who was murdered with someone with a gun over her head. That's the kind of thing that kind of evokes the imagery of surrender.
David, I think that was absolutely disgusting what you just did then. I think that was absolutely repulsive and disgusting, and you should be ashamed of yourself. When you talk, when a Prime Minister, whether you agree with the language or not, talks about a surrender bill and talks about those terms, in no way to any normal thinking, normal sentient being does that invoke the image of Jo Cox being murdered. It does not to any normal human being. You know it doesn't, and it didn't for you. And you just used the memory of a dead mother to make a political point. I'm sorry, David. I think you should be ashamed of yourself.
Well, I'm sorry, Julia, but if you want to have a robust debate, then it has to go both ways. But this Prime Minister is using deeply insensitive language, and this is dog whistle politics. That's what we saw last night.
I think we can safely say that if that is the case, it is definitely happening on both sides. Let's talk about what happens. I think that was so unedifying. I'm genuinely embarrassed for you. Let's talk about what happens next. Then, your party, Liberal Democrats, say, but also you want to have a general election. I've said this to all of my guests. I completely understand you don't trust Boris Johnson, that he's going to not sneak through a no-deal Brexit. Yeah. I accept that. I think that is a fair criticism of our Prime Minister, given his record of honesty. However, if there were a way that we could get some sort of election date set in stone before October the 31st, so that if there were an election that led to a Remain party winning and to stop Brexit, that you would have time to stop it from happening before October the 31st, would you agree to that election date being set and for Parliament to be dissolved and for the British people to get to have their say?
Look, Julia, I absolutely want an election, but there's something really, really important here in terms of procedure and technicality. The Parliament has passed legislation that mandates the Prime Minister to send a letter to the European Union requesting an extension to Article 50. At the moment, as Prime Minister, he is the only person that holds that pen and can sign that letter. And until that letter goes, we will not be voting for an election. If he can sign the letter, as has been requested by Parliament, if we're serious about Parliament taking back control and taking back control of our laws, if he sends that letter, we're up for an election and we're ready for it. And I think the SNP will do very well indeed. And
just in terms of the attempts, I think your party and the Liberal Democrats have talked about bringing that date forward. Right now, the Ben Act, that has got a date of the 19th of October. That's the day after the European Council Summit, 17th and 18th finishes. If Prime Minister hasn't got a deal by then he has to go and ask for that extension, 3 months or possibly more if the EU wants a longer extension. There's talk about moving that date forward well ahead of the 19th of October. Is there likely to be support in the House of Commons for that? And if so, what sort of date are we looking at? Later this month or what?
Well, we'll see exactly what happens. I mean, one of the reasons why I think a number of MPs were trying last night to get an idea from the Prime Minister about what progress is being made is simply for that reason. I think there is probably a willingness in Parliament for people to try and work together, but that requires the government to try and work with colleagues as well. And what we see is a Prime Minister who's been found unlawful by Parliament, who's being obstructive, using insensitive language. I don't get the impression that Boris Johnson really wants a deal. And nothing that I saw in that over 3-hour statement last night indicates to me that he's serious about getting some sort of deal with the European Union and respecting all of the votes across these islands. So I think we're probably at a stage where, frankly, the boat has sailed for Boris Johnson.
Let's move on, though, right now, to talk to one of the many MPs yesterday who lined up to criticise the Prime Minister. That was the Labour MP Barry Sheerman, who joins us now. Good morning to you.
Hello, Julia.
Barry,
how are you?
very well indeed, sir. You seemed pretty angry yesterday. Very emotional. I would say, not even just shouting, screaming at the Prime Minister about saying he had no shame at all.
Julia, can I hold you back?
Could I finish my sentence? Barry, could I finish my question? You claim the government was cynically manipulating a prorogation, which I think most people with a sensible brain on can agree has happened. But do you think that your contribution yesterday, leaving aside the substance of the debate, do you think your style of contribution and your language, do you think that helped the political debate at all?
Julia, first of all, I didn't ask a question of the Prime Minister. It was to the Attorney General.
To the Attorney General, yeah.
And I spoke with passion, but I did not use inflammatory language. In fact, I made a call yesterday for all of us, whether we're passionate Remainers or passionate Leavers, to tone down the language, to be passionate, yes, as I was yesterday, but and be angry, but not use words like traitor and surrender and this awful language that was used in the chamber later that night when the Prime Minister was performing.
OK, let me just let's have another very quick listen to what you had to say to the Attorney General yesterday.
Mr. Speaker, I came into the chamber today thinking I felt sorry for the Attorney General. But as he started, I did. Fair enough. But every word he has uttered, no shame today, no shame at all. The fact that this government cynically manipulated the prorogation to shut down this House so that it couldn't work as a democratic assembly. He knows that that is the truth. And to come here with these barristers' bluster to obfuscate the truth, and for a man like him, a party like this, and a leader like this Prime Minister, to talk about morals and morality is a disgrace!
To speak like that in the chamber, to talk about bluster and to talk about disgrace, are you genuinely saying that you think you made a perfectly reasonable but passionate contribution yesterday? Do you think do you not share any responsibility along with everyone else who spoke like that on all sides? Leave and Remain, Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, whoever. Do you not think you all share some responsibility?
You just hold on, listen. You and I know each other very well. Indeed, I was a friend of your father's, as I was a family friend of Jo Cox's. So this is very personal for me to actually talk about this in very measured terms. And I wanted yesterday to speak with passion. And I don't speak as loudly, and I shouted a bit. Of course I did. But what made me see red was the fact that I was sitting there listening to the Attorney General, and there was no humility, no apology for the government having been found out of illegally closing down Parliament. And I was listening to that, and then he said that the Parliament, was immoral. And we were immoral. And the thought that here was Attorney General calling me and other parliamentarians immoral, that really made me angry, and that's why I spoke with such passion.
But do you understand why so many people on the Leave side are also impassioned and are also angry and talk about morality? When we talk about the morality of ignoring the votes and just fighting against the votes in a democratic referendum, which everyone on every side said they would respect, and 3.5 years on are doing their best not to respect. Do you understand that passions are high on both sides, and these claims of morality and immorality, they do work both ways?
Julia, you're absolutely right, but I'm not guilty of the sort of language that's being used that is damaging. I was doing a lot of interviews after my comments yesterday, and do you know how hurtful it is to walk across to College Green and a woman that you've never met in your life looks at you, recognises you, and calls you traitor? Now, that's the sort of language that has been used in the House of Commons. I deplore that. In fact, I'm known in the House of Commons, I used to be the parliamentary church warden, indeed, to get all to moderate our language, to act in a civilised way with each other. And indeed, on Radio 5 Live this morning, I made a very strong call for everyone to call down for the Prime Minister to stop talking in the way that he does. And I think all of us, this morning, should reflect on the intensity of the discussion yesterday and the language that was used, and do better.
You have to say that, but I have to say my experience of you on social media doesn't match up with your description of yourself, Barry, I'm afraid.
Julia, you and I are antagonistic on social media a bit, but I'm never rude to you. I disagree with you. You're very right-wing.
I'm not very right-wing, but
pro-Brexit. And I'm very disappointed, as I do your dad very well. I keep a fatherly eye on you. But
how very kind of you. Barry, I had to block you on Twitter because you were being so abusive to me.
Your job is being high profile and contentious.
No, that's not mine. My job is as a political journalist and commentator, and I give my thoughts. I don't believe as you know, I don't come from the right. I actually was raised in a left-wing family. As you know, my father stood to be a Labour MP twice, but I don't believe Brexit is a left or right issue. But this is my point: is that there are lots of people on the opposition benches who are pointing the finger at the Tory government. I don't hold a candle for Boris Johnson. A lot of things that Tory governments and any political party does. However, I call it as I see it, and it seems to me that both sides are responsible for some of this language, and I would suggest that actually it has been the opposition that has brought us to this point. Doesn't justify death threats, but it's the opposition that has brought us to this point where people genuinely are using words like traitor. If, as Boris Johnson said, if the referendum result was delivered, if there was Brexit, I think this would all calm down, and your party is desperate to stop Brexit from happening along with other MPs.
A little word in edgeways in that I've come on your programme to ask everyone to moderate their language. The most immoderate language used yesterday in the House was from the Prime Minister. Appalling when he mentioned Jo Cox, my great friend and next-door neighbour in constituency terms, was prated and was really upset her family. And also, of course, what we have got to get to the bottom of is sorting this Brexit nonsense out. No, I said yesterday in Parliament, I said I wanted people to be passionate on both sides, but not to use this language that's inflammatory. So let's all calm down. I disagree with you on Europe. I don't want an early election is dominated by Brexit. That's why I'd like a new vote, a new referendum before we have an election. I want the election to be about the economy, about the National Health Service, about all those important things of everyone's life. But I do not want an election hurried into by a Prime Minister who thinks he can only win by making a Brexit-based election.
OK, can I just remind you of a tweet you sent? I just unblocked you on Twitter 11 hours ago. A tweet you sent about Boris Johnson. This is you calling for meta discourse about Boris Johnson. You said, he doesn't model himself on the ancient Greeks and Romans. His hero is obviously Il Duce, a.k.a. Mussolini.
I was having a...
Oh, you were having a laugh. It's amazing how many MPs are coming on today saying, but what I said was a joke.
I was responding to the most respected classical expert in Oxford on something that she said, and I came. And
you brought in a fascist leader.
Well, I think, to be honest, I used to teach this subject when I was a university teacher, and I have to tell you that it is Mussolini, I think, that is a great deal of comparison to Boris Johnson. And that is not to be unfair. That it was Mussolini that put the people against Parliament. That's exactly what he did. And I think I've got every reason for saying that Mussolini style of, talking above and over the Parliament directly to the people. That was Mussolini's style. He loved referendums, of course. He had lots of them.
And again, it just seems to me that it's always going to be defensible when your side does it, but it's never defensible when the other side does it. Maybe if everyone stopped doing it, it would be better. No one should be making death threats at anybody at all for any reason. Right now, though, let's talk to the Liberal Democrat MP, Christine Jardine. She's also their Home Affairs spokeswoman. She joins us now. Good morning to you, Christine.
Good morning.
Good morning. I mean, we've been talking all morning about frankly, hysterical scenes that we saw in the House of Commons yesterday. Lots of finger-pointing, lots of accusations, lots of very, perhaps you say, unhelpful language, I would say, on all sides. Was there really any point in MPs returning to Parliament yesterday?
Of course there was. The idea that you can suspend Parliament unlawfully and then not return is ridiculous. It was clear from the Supreme Court judgment that Parliament had not been prorogued, and in those circumstances, it was correct to go back. But we wanted to get on with some work. We actually wanted to get back and debate some things. Now, the unfortunate thing is yesterday, because of the way Parliament had been falsely suspended, there was no business to start with. We had to go down there and set the business up. But going back to what you were saying, what we actually saw was, I think, in terms of being responsible politicians, I think was a disgrace. What we saw, particularly from both the Attorney General and the Prime Minister, the language and the aggressive language you speak. You've just been speaking about people getting death threats and violence and all the rest of it. It's completely unacceptable. But what is also completely unacceptable is for a politician from any party to stand up in Parliament in any debate and use language that stokes up division.
Sorry, with all due respect, Christine, your party at the European elections in May, and even your MPs actually entering the European Parliament earlier this month, had an official campaign slogan of B word to Brexit. I can't even say that word on air because it's not allowed by Ofcom under the media rules.
Seriously, Julia,
you're talking about
how that compares.
How does that compare? This is about having a civil political discourse and people showing respect for each other and the other side of the argument. How does saying the B word, let's say Ollocks, how does saying Ollocks to Brexit, I think I can get away with that one, Ofcom rules, how does that, in an election, how does telling 17.4 million people who voted in a free and fair referendum 3 years ago that you say that word to them in your campaign, how is that civil, respectful, polite discourse?
That words that you're saying that we can't use is being said to a process, to a thing. It is not standing up in the Parliament and being offensive and aggressive towards the other side.
Well, who did that? Tell me who did that. Tell me, can you quote? You're very angry about it, so can you quote at what point that was done? When you were saying Geoffrey Cox was saying that Parliament was a disgrace. That's about a thing. Boris Johnson said he didn't agree with the Supreme Court decision.
No, Boris Johnson said a lot of other things.
Okay, so what did he say? Tell me what he said that you think that was offensive.
Julia, there were specific things which, to be honest, I don't want to repeat because I don't want to get into
How convenient.
No, Julia, I'm being honest with you. I find the whole aggressive nature of the debate that yesterday, I found it offensive. And you're talking about people having death threats. Remember, these are my colleagues. Some of them are my friends.
Yes, my friends have had death threats as well. Yeah, I've been sent nooses on Twitter.
I appreciate that. But what I'm saying is that respectful politicians should not be stoking it up yesterday.
Why do you think referring to the Ben Bill as the Surrender Bill or Surrender Act, why do you think that in any way, then, even if that is quoted by some absolute lunatic who thinks it's an appropriate response to any political debate to threaten violence against an MP, which clearly makes them outside of normal social and political discourse, why do you think that someone using language like surrender or traitor and the like, why do you think that does strike home? Because it seems to me that that's the sort of language that a lot of people have been using for the last 3.5 years. And I would say I could understand. I'm not saying it justifies violence ever, but certainly that language I think is perfectly appropriate given that we are talking about MPs going to the European Commission saying, for God's sake, don't give us a deal. We're going to negotiate with you behind the scenes. We don't want to recognise a democratic vote. I mean, I don't know why you think that isn't traitorous, and I don't know why you think that isn't surrendering.
Well, because I think that language is incredibly emotive. I think it
is emotive, yes.
I think there's a danger that people use that incredibly emotive language to evoke a different period in history and to try and equate this.
Are you going to bring up the war now?
No, any other period in history.
What period of history were you referring to then?
Well, if you're talking about people surrendering, you're talking about you're using language which is inappropriate for politics. You're using language
like the B word to Brexit. That's inappropriate to politics as well, isn't it? I mean, you must accept that. Please accept that saying the B word to Brexit official campaign slogan is not acceptable.
No, I don't.
You're going to defend it.
Julia,
You're going to defend it, and then you're going to come on my radio show and tell the country that we need to have more civil political discourse. Do you understand how an awful lot of people might be viewing this and might be hearing this and thinking this is just abject hypocrisy?
No, I think a lot of people will be listening to it, Julia, and thinking, what is she talking about? It was a joke. There's a world of a difference between making a joke and saying something which is tongue-in-cheek and dismissive about, if I could finish, about a process, and then standing up in Parliament or in the street or anywhere else and talking about your opponents in a way that is emotive and it worsens the divisions that we have in this country. Now, I'm not the only one saying this. A lot of politicians are saying today we have to put an end to this emotive, divisive language which is stoking up.
I would say you go first. But I want to ask you just finally, we're right against the clock, but do you genuinely think that it's a joke to basically say to 17.4 million people, 52% of people who voted in 2016, that the thing they voted for doesn't matter and can just be ignored and their vote doesn't matter? Because if you think that's a joke, I do have to warn you, I think an awful lot of people don't think it's funny.
Julia, don't put words in my mouth.
You said it was a joke.
I am not saying...
You said it was a joke.
Julia, can I explain? I am not saying that this process that we are going through is a joke. Believe me, it's horrific. I think the country is in a mess and deserves so much better than this disaster which has been brought upon us. And the idea of going off into this no-deal Brexit ridiculous land, I find offensive. But what we were trying to do was not use offensive language, not talk about people, not stoke up division, but to take a more... light-hearted approach to the situation that we are all in and we are all trying to find a way out of.
Okay.
And I think we all need to do that. We all need to step back from this appalling, divisive, emotive...
All right, then. Well, if you find some of the language the Prime Minister is using and others are using appalling and offensive, will you also accept that there are many on the Brexit side who find the B word to Brexit appalling and emotive? And if we aren't getting the joke, because we're not getting the joke, will you now agree, will you apologize on behalf of your party, that you won't be using that slogan again? You won't be sending your MEPs into the Parliament wearing that slogan on their T-shirts? Because I don't think the joke's funny. I find the joke offensive. So on that basis, will you stop doing that?
I'm sorry you find it offensive, Julia, but, I've never worn one of the T-shirts, so I can't say I'll stop doing anything. I'm sorry you find it offensive. It's not meant to be offensive. And if you find it offensive, then I'm sorry for that.